Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us and sticking around this late in the day. I'm Aspen Reese. I'm the moderator for this session, and I'll try to keep us moving so we can get on to cocktail hour more quickly than possible. Maybe I'll allow the speakers just to introduce themselves when they go up to give their presentations, but to give you some context, the name of this session is Health and Sustainable Nutrition in a Climate Change Scenario, but we're thinking about nutrition very broadly, maybe more in the context of food safety, things like, and food security and food quality, right? So it is food systems, which we expect to be impacted, and also to contribute to climate change, and to obviously materialize in health impacts in a wide variety of ways. So with that, maybe we will get started with our first presentation, which is from Sofie Dhollander, who's at the European Food Safety Authority as a senior scientist. Maybe I should have said that while you were walking up. I feel like it should be like an award ceremony. There could be music. Great. Thank you, Sofie. Great, thank you so much. And next up, we have Dr. Andrew Bremer, who is the National Institutes of Health's Director for the Office of Nutrition Research. The NIH is a U.S. biomedical research funder and also a research organization. Andrew has remembered to turn on his microphone, so go ahead.
Fantastic. And I do realize that we are standing between you and cocktails and dinner upstairs. So I'm going to keep this brief, maybe, and keep it at one slide. And thanks, Aspen, for the chance to be here. And I really, I want to stress one, if I can stress one thing, it really is that there are reciprocal and relationships between food systems and planetary health. One absolutely impacts the other and vice versa, and both tremendously impact human health. And so when we think about, when we have questions and kind of talk about sustainable diets, that's kind of where we're going here. How do you have diets that are sustainable? How do you have diets and food systems that are equitable, that are scalable, accessible, affordable, and can really be impact health across the globe, but yet also stay within planetary boundaries? And that's a challenge. I think we can do it, and that's why it's super cool, and that's why I love going to work every day. Is thinking about how to do that, but also again in the context of food systems, one invariably impacts planetary health, and planetary health impacts food systems. And just in the context of agriculture, we heard different stats today about food systems and their carbon footprint. If you just think about agriculture, so food and livestock production, that contributes maybe 25 to 30% of the CO2 and kind of the greenhouse gas emissions. But it accounts for 40% of the land use across the globe and about 70% of water use. So just agriculture production has that impact on the globe. And so as we think about how to modify food systems and how to think about sustainable diets, we have to, again, it has to be in the context of planetary boundaries, and there's always offsets. And I'll leave and I'll go back to my chair. When we think about sustainable diets too, we also have to realize that it's not one size fits all. It's very context specific and it's very population specific. Be it maternal child health, be it in different parts of the globe, there is no one concept or one definition, if you will, of a sustainable diet. It has to be done in the context of where that diet is going to be implemented. So with that, I'll be quiet. Fantastic.
Great. So next up we have Dr. Shouro Dasgupta, who's an environmental economist at the Fondazione, CMCC, which I will admit I don't know what that acronym stands for. So maybe you can tell us about that as well as your
Thank you, Aspen. I felt Aspen promised us cocktail hour during the session, but I may be mistaken. So CMCC stands for Centro Euromediterraneo sui Cambiamenti Climatici, CMCC. If you want to be jealous, I am based in Venice, and I live there as well. Thank you, Aspen, and thank you to the Commission and all the great people here for organizing this fantastic event. As Aspen said, I'm an economist, but I'm a good kind, right? I work on environmental economics, food security, and labor, and so on. So my focus will be on access to food and nutrition. So you've heard a lot about the food system in general. I want to focus on something specific, and you will notice why. Food insecurity has been an uncommon concept in Europe in the context of access to food and nutrition. We in Europe have had good access to food, let's face it. But this is no longer the case. The last decade or so, the population in Europe have faced increasing problems with food. And we'll talk about specific events, but if you look at this chart, it makes it clear that reds are more and more common across European countries over time. Now, this data comes from FAO's fantastic Food Insecurity Experience Scale. We use individual level data. In a second, you will see how does climate change come into effect. But moderate and or severe food insecurity in Europe in 2022, for which we have the last year of data, is nearly 9%. Yeah? So that's overall, that's an index. But if we dive into it, nearly 15% of the population in Europe reported that they had access to fewer kinds of food, so items, than they thought they should. 14% reported that they were unable to afford healthy and nutritious food. This is something we have been used to from the US. In the US, people are used to eating a lot, but not necessarily healthy. That has now been translated in Europe, unfortunately. Nearly 9% of the European population reported that they ate less than they should, right? So this is perception-based, but as you can see, food insecurity is now reflected in our daily, it's a daily phenomenon now. This was not the case before. Now, how does climate change come into effect? Do not cite this slide, wait until April 22nd, when the Lancet Countdown in Europe will be published. So this is an indicator in this year's Lancet Countdown in Europe for the first time. I'm glad Alan's here. What we do is we attribute increasing frequency of heat wave days and drought months compared to 1981 to 2010 baseline to moderate and or severe food insecurity in Europe. What we find that in 2022 alone, nearly 12 million additional Europeans or additional people in Europe, living in Europe, suffered from food insecurity due to climate change. This is a big number. The overall food insecure population in Europe is about 60 million. Out of those, 12 million can be attributed to climate change. Just a little bit on policies. I know we're going to cover all this later as well. Economists have a tendency to be reactive to crisis. We react, right? That's why the discipline of economics lurches from crisis to crisis. In the context of a changing climate, we now have an opportunity to be proactive. For example, proactive safety nets, right? Proactive cash transfers. Anticipate disasters, anticipate crisis. This is how we can actively deal with the impending food insecurity crisis in Europe in the coming years. With that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Great, and our last introductory presentation will be from Rosalinda Scalia. She's the Deputy Head of the Unit of Bioeconomy and Food Systems at the European Commission's Directorate General. I don't actually, our American bad influence here, we both don't know your terminology and export bad diets. So the Director General for Research and Innovation, which is hosting this presentation. So.
Thank you and good afternoon, colleagues. So you already introduced me. I just want to add that I'm an agronomist by training and that I have been working as policy officer for many years in the food safety sector. So now I'm here with this in this capacity of being part of RTD that is broader, let's say. I was glad to see the example of food safety taken in the plenary session as a possible case study for everything that fits all the emergency that we have. So, and I'm glad that I can continue this discussion with you today. Now, you see next, the only slide that I prepared, that should be the next one, but, okay. Yes, thank you. Because I'm here mainly to present what is Food 2030. But before doing so, I just took some notes from the plenary, and I saw that food system had been mentioned twice before by Professor Andy Haynes and by Professor Marina Romanello. So we can all understand how crucial are food systems in this discussion, and I don't need to repeat what has been already said. Then Rebecca Grace also mentioned the importance of doing networks globally, so not only at European level, but globally, so that's another starting point for our discussion today. And what perhaps was missing was a reflection on disease prevention. I don't know if it was me missing it or if we can have some room here to expand more on the role of nutrition in terms of disease prevention, nutrition in the context of climate change, of course. So now we go to our baby, RTD baby, that is Food 2030, is the policy, is the vision for an R&I systemic change of all the food system, of all the actors that are part of the food systems. This vision is going to be deployed on the ground thanks to Horizon Europe, and also I heard also some wish for the next framework program that we still don't have, that we still name as FP10, and we really hope to continue this transformative change also in the next framework program, because we understand that there is still a lot to do in terms of going beyond silos. This is our main approach from RTD side, but also from the Commission, the European Commission in general. So we go beyond silos and we try to tackle the problems of the food system in a holistic way. So you heard already the figures about greenhouse gases emissions. I'm not going to repeat how crucial is the agricultural sector in reducing greenhouse emissions. And of all the figures that have been mentioned, I just want to repeat or to mention that 14.5 of the global anthropogenic greenhouse gases are produced by the livestock production in terms, and that are sinking resources in terms of land use, in terms of natural resources. So we all have this understanding, but then when we need to deploy solutions on the ground, it's difficult to act. From our side, in terms of Horizon Europe projects, I can reassure you that a lot has been done from different and several projects that are already making the changes in the ground that we need, but we are deploying other solutions, and we are funding, thanks to the work program of Horizon Europe, in particular Cluster 6 of Horizon Europe, a lot of new projects that I hope we can mention later on during the discussion, or that you can also check on our website of Horizon Europe, Cluster 6. So that it's in a nutshell what Food 2030 is about. People spoke about co-benefits, others say that are true and real benefits, and our priorities are on nutrition, climate, as you can see, circularity, and innovation. So, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our speakers for those introductory remarks. If the goal here is eventually to get at holistic solutions and to, on the way there, figure out a research program that will make those possible. I wanted to start with some questions to the speakers, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience, which can be submitted through Slido. And maybe we'll start by just really understanding the context of the threat that climate change presents to food systems and nutrition. So I'm going to direct this question to Sofie to start out with, although the other presenters can also chime in on thinking about beyond the sort of poster child for agricultural impacts, which is anticipated reductions in yield. What are some of the threats that climate change presents to food systems that we should be worried about and thinking about addressing?
Thanks, Aspen. Well, as I mentioned a few examples already during the introduction, I think, of course, yields are indirectly leading to production and health threat of animals as well. We know that 80% of agriculture land is actually used for livestock production globally, so that will directly impact animal production if there are problems with yield. But focusing only, for instance, on temperature rises or extreme weather events, how that directly impacts animal health and welfare. There are hundreds of examples. I gave just the most obvious ones that you can also see for human health. Vector-borne diseases is a very well-known one. And I think a lot has been done to collect data, to work together with, for instance, different agencies in Europe to standardize data collection. But now we face a huge challenge, that is, how can we control those diseases once they are introduced? So we need actually a very harmonized, integrated vector control initiative, let's say, for that. And therefore, we need to have a One Health approach, clearly, not looking at it from the animal health or the human health or the plant or the environment side only. So this is very needed, I think. If we look at waterborne diseases, we know that we cannot change maybe the rising of the temperatures, but then we need to be prepared for those. We can always develop more in terms of vaccinations and so on for specific diseases or mitigation measures to deal with those. I can continue, but I think it's not the idea of talking here so much, and I'm sure the audience can also.
I can't resist. I totally appreciate But to your point, no, the quality of the food that's grown on that land is changing dramatically. It has changed with concentrations of CO2 and heat. And so we're in a place where it's not just growing and providing enough food. What is the quality of the food? And then the downstream indicator is if we can't grow enough food or can't grow enough nutritious and healthy food, if we process it and try to address hunger and food insecurity with unhealthy food, are we driving malnutrition and making the nutrition security even worse? And so all these things are definitely tied together, and all those food production elements impact the environment and impact the climate. Again, so these bidirectional changes. How do we think about these problems and ask the right research questions to inform the decision makers about those trade-offs?
Great. Drew, I'm going to put you on the spot for our next question as the doctor on call in the room. Can you unpack a bit the particular health conditions and diseases that we're most concerned about in terms of climate change's impacts through nutrition and diet?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm not an economist, I'm just a doctor. I love that line. I'm going to back up from the mic. No, I think just to piggyback on what I said about the nutritional content of food, at a global scale, it's disheartening as mostly someone who does pediatrics. The amount of anemia, iron deficiency anemia, and iodine deficiency, if you look globally, is still pretty profound, even in this day and age of biofortification and supply not always being an issue. So I think in the context of climate change, as the nutritional quality of food often decreases, are we going to be seeing more micronutrient-driven disease? And I think the answer is yes. I think we're already seeing it. I think it opens the question about biofortification and other types of food production technologies that can address micronutrient deficiency. But it's across the globe, and it was highlighted upstairs that we've exported these dietary patterns that really exacerbate not just overweight and obesity, but micronutrient deficiency, and it's often called the double burden, but there are actually multiple burdens of malnutrition along that spectrum. And so I think in the disease space, we're going to see a lot more micronutrient deficiency related diseases.
Yeah. Also a doctor, but not the kind that helps. So on this, This brings us challenges in economic development and economic growth policies. Let's say development, right? The idea over the last 30 years or so have been grow, food insecurity will decrease, your population will be well fed. But if you look at the data from 2017 onwards, there has been a decoupling. Growth in most countries continue to increase, but food insecurity is now increasing in the last 6 years or so. So essentially it has been use your wealth to feed the people as much as you want, but that no longer can be held to absolute truth, right? We may be feeding the population the same amount of food, if not more, but they're not getting the nutritional quality, nutritional content. So this needs to be looked at from an overall economic perspective as well.
See, never give me the mic. No, I totally agree, and I think where I see this clinically, and I think folks will agree, is this concept to talk about exacerbating inequalities and healthcare disparities. It's this concept of, again, not having enough nutritious food. There's the element of hunger, which is horrible and it's something to actually address, but the lack of access to nutritious food is dramatically widening healthcare disparities, and it's different for different populations. Again, when I talk very generally about micronutrient deficiencies. But there's certain categories. Certainly those first 1,000 days, and when kiddos when they're first eating, adolescent girls, I mean, adolescents in general is understudied. The nutritional interventions to adolescent girls who are laying on bone and getting ready to reproduce, you know, they have different needs. Pregnant and lactating individuals have different needs, and so this concept again is it's not a one size fits all, but different populations are being disproportionately affected, but it's definitely increasing healthcare disparities.
Yes, this brings me the occasion to remind that we recently published a Food 2030 report where we have identified 11 pathways for actions that are cross-cutting pathways, and one of them is really called nutrition and sustainable healthy diets. So we have identified some gaps in this issue that you were just mentioning, and we want to fund research projects that really help us to identify the needs of categories of population. It's not so straightforward to identify the needs of young people and children, then adults and elderly people. I don't know if I'm using the right wording because also the definitions are so a bit blurry in this domain. But this is one of our main objectives of the future, to have specific projects targeting these needs.
I'll keep going up. Just to piggyback on what Rosalinda said, in a way, it's easier to identify vulnerable populations in low-income countries because of the DHS, MICS datasets. In Europe, it's difficult to obtain such data, and we have been struggling. So we have published in Burkina Faso, we have ongoing work in Bangladesh, where I'm from, we have ongoing work in India, South Africa. We know exactly what people eat through food consumption diaries, and that allows us to gauge nutritional content in their diet. But in Europe, that has been challenging. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Thinking about this balance between global trends and local trends, we know that in recent decades, globalization has led to a homogenization and an integration of our food systems, which has in many ways had negative impacts on health. But how do we expect regional climate change, right? There are overarching trends, but there are also going to be very localized impacts to play out on that global stage, both in terms of health outcomes as well as the economics of accessibility to food or affordability of food.
Increasing integrated markets, food markets, and climate change makes it more difficult, right? We can think of two crises that comes to mind. Remember, 2006 to 2008, a sequence of climate change-induced wheat crisis in Australia, it started in Australia, essentially triggered a global food crisis. Pasta prices in Italy increased by nearly 20%. Toppled the government, not directly, but there was it is. We need to think of such links, right? But climate change affects food production both inside and outside Europe. This is especially important because Europe imports 46% of fresh vegetables and 31%, 46% of fresh fruits and 31% fresh vegetables, right? So climate change-induced harvest shocks in exporting countries, in major exporting countries, partners of Europe, has significant, substantial repercussions on food prices, volatility, and access to food in Europe. Now, climate change, especially extreme events, substantially affects the food supply chain, whether be it in storage, transport, distribution, you name it, right? And something, I can only repeat what the great Professor Amartya Sen said, 35 years ago now. Food crisis rarely happens due to lack of production. It usually always happens due to distributional challenges. Climate change is increasing the probability of this distributional challenges. Before I finish, 2022, remember the River Rhine, the backbone of Europe's transportation link, dropped so low that it became a challenge to supply food to major parts of Europe. This is what we are looking into. This is what we are facing in the next years or so. The other crisis that comes to mind, 2012, breadbasket, climate change-induced shocks in breadbasket countries resulted in significant increases in food prices in Europe. Remember, rice prices doubled in several European countries. Maize prices increased by nearly 15% in a number of countries. This is what we're increasingly facing. Thank you.
When you mention River Rhine, I'm thinking of River Po, who was at the same time very low or even dry. So not only the fish dried, but also the irrigation system of all the agricultural land in the Po Valley, which is fed since decades by irrigation, not by rain. So no more Po, no more agriculture. That's it. Yeah. So it's very
so
frightening.
Very, and River Po dropped so low that what
You knew I couldn't keep quiet. No, but I think to the question about globalization of diets and kind of we've used also the term the nutrition transition. You know, I think an opportunity to call that out and recognize it and go back to more individual farming is, you know, going back to my point earlier. There is no one solution, and so what one conceptualizes as a sustainable diet really is totally context and regional specific. And I think a great consequence of going back to that system is also increasing the biodiversity of the foods that we eat, and that's another element in this space is that we really. We use 5 main crops for most of our food, and so a lot of the diversity has been modified. But there's an opportunity, I think, to get to restore that, which I think from a health perspective, again, really it does mitigate a lot of the health effects of our current food system.
Great. So I'm going to direct one more question to Rosalinda, and then we'll turn to the audience. But thinking in terms of what we do with the research that is conducted in this space and how we get at solutions, can you speak briefly towards how health researchers and professionals can engage with the food sector, right? Thinking about producers, but also regulators and traders and financiers to better understand and mediate these impacts that we've been discussing.
Yes, thank you for this interesting question. Of course, as I said at the beginning, we need to put all the actors of the food system together to speak and to find a platform for working together. These are done under governance actions that we want to put in place, that we actually started already to put in place. For nutritious and sustainable healthy diets, we think that we should continue to research, because the health literacy of the general population still needs to be drastically increased. So also we need to pay particular attention also to the education purposes and to find the right tools to reach the people that we want to engage, and also how to go from local to global, because we in the food systems sustainability approach, we know that the local solutions are those that are the best to put forward, but how then we can scale up those solutions to a global scenario. That's also another tricky issue that we are looking into.
No, because Aspen's question is one that I think about every day, and I think where I see opportunity. I mean, there's been such a technological advancements in the past 5 to 10 years that everywhere on the food supply chain, whether it be digital farming or precision farming or vertical farming, to Shouro's comment about transport and processing and packaging, there's lots of different ways where innovations and technology can address that. How do we package fruits and vegetables so that they have the same shelf life as a Twinkie? Maybe we can't, but maybe there are ways to increase the shelf life of those foods that are healthy. And then even using technologies, either and then this goes to Aspen's question about regulatory bodies. Cellular agriculture. There's lab grown meat, lab grown milk. All these other products. There's 3D printing. There's biopurifications. There's foods that are genetically modified. There's technologies now that are out there that can dramatically change, the food that's made, and to the point what the nutrient composition and the bioactive composition of those foods that are made. Yeah. I'll be quiet.
I have a very niche comment here, but this comment goes to sort of integrating several agencies. Europe's aging population is also reflected in the age composition of European farmers. 1/3 of European farmers are 65 and above. Farmers or agricultural workers are already some of the most vulnerable occupations to warming, essentially, and no more than the farmers we have in Europe. So this needs to be looked at, right? How we combine regulatory bodies, EU OSHA. I know representatives from EU OSHA already are here in this conference. And we combine this with the agricultural agencies to improve sustainability. We have been talking about smallholding farmers, but this needs to be. This is almost an urgent scenario right now.
Great, so we're going to turn to the Slido questions, and we have one that's very appropriate, and that I'm going to ask the Europeans to answer. Drew, regarding the recent news items and actions around European agricultural policy, and in light of the fact that European agriculture is unhealthy and polluting and fueling climate change, what do you say to farmers opposing climate transformation and environmental laws? And I'm going to tack on maybe what are some potential routes to addressing that, aside from just disagreeing with them.
So, no, I start just because I was in Place Luxembourg the other week when all the tractors were occupying the European Parliament Square. So I feel this issue very close to my heart because I'm also coming from a farmer family and because I'm working with research and agriculture. So Cluster 6 of Horizon Europe, it's about agriculture, environment, and food systems, and biodiversity. Everything is together because of a reason, because we have to convince also people to accept that some measures have long-term benefits. So it was said in the plenary. I don't have now specific figures to present, but it's science evident that if we put in place some measures, then those measures will pay off, even in 5 years, not so in such a long term. The thing is that, as it was also suggested, scientists should speak more with policymakers should speak with scientists, and ultimately we should seek for societal acceptance. So it's a chain that needs to be improved, put in place, and we don't have to use only regulations to have the changes in the ground. Those are important tools, but first of all, we need to include the social science and humanities in the whole research approach and go beyond silos also in the research world, let's say.
So this is, well, not controversial, but I think this is where going beyond regulation, but Rosalinda has already explained all this, it's sort of even taking to the farmers that it's a win-win situation, right? But the long-term aspects are often lost, especially in the agricultural industry. I think this is where we have a clear opportunity to explain that short-term losses or short-term opportunity costs will result in long-term gains, but there is no doubt that they need to be helped. Whatever, if CAP needs to step in or needs to be put in place, but benefits to them must be expanded. Otherwise, why would they sign on voluntarily, right? This won't happen. Let's face it, right? That's what I have to say.
Yeah, it's like has been mentioned. The livestock production, for instance, has been the driver and the victim of climate change. But it's not an easy solution that we can impose right away. From EFA's point of view, of course, we are not into policy development or legislation development, but we can encourage, for instance, research that can can innovate certain practices to reduce heat stress. When we are doing research on animal welfare, for instance, we see more and more heat stress in cows. So which kind of farming systems can facilitate reduction of heat stress in animals, etc. So there are lots of possibilities, but of course it's not a solution that will be one from tomorrow.
Oh, baby, can I talk? No, and in fact, TV is a wonder. Oh. No,
That's like
is spot on, and that's recently been published. Yeah, good. Enhanced nutrition, mitigates a lot of the comorbidities of TB, and we've known this. This is the HIV story too. That improved nutrition, really mitigated a lot of the excess morbidity in HIV, and this concept of food as medicine really evolved in that era of having nutritionally and medically tailored meals for individuals with infectious diseases. I don't disagree at all. The concept I was trying kind of going, and this is going to open Pandora's box, is dealing with food insecurity and hunger, as horrible as it is, can often be addressed by producing and producing food. Then the question is, what is the quality of that food? And this is something that we're grappling with. Is it how processed is it? What is these edible food-like substances that are being given to people to address hunger? And I would dare say that that's actually making nutritional status worse. And I kind of conceptualize nutritional status as both an input and an outcome of health. Certainly, if someone is undernourished, they're more susceptible to certain infections and diseases and comorbidities. But their nutritional status also impacts how they're treated and their response to treatment. And so it's all a continuum. And so I think in this context of health, it's not just about producing food. It's about producing food that's of high enough quality to stay healthy. Yeah.
Just to complete, the physicians among us were used to give vitamin B for TB cases, now in Western countries we don't give it anymore. One of the research agenda I think what should be pushed is which kind of nutrients could be added as part of the regular free-fall drug therapy that we have for TB. I think that it's a complex issue because there's a lot of absence of population level data. There's a lot of specific data on one by one, personal data, but there's almost no. I tried to look at that. I didn't find any good level data that could be used for reaching the issue. Which kind of nutrient could be added as a policy for supporting, preventing, and treating, complementing drugs for TB, which is the larger cause of death as a single cause in the world. Just a small bit.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, and I can talk about this for days. I think when an example of fortification really is folate and neural tube defects and other single elements and nutrients that have been added to certain food processes. That's been helpful, but I think that's also been a hindrance to our field, because that's a very reductionist approach to nutrition. It's a single, looking at folate, B12, calcium, zinc, iodine. We intentionally have looked at nutrients on a siloed basis and a reductionist basis with that hope of adding certain things in combinations to help to mitigate disease and optimize. No, we don't eat single nutrients. We actually eat food, and so what is the composition of those nutrients in the foods that we eat, and then how in the context of this discussion, how is climate and environmental changes modifying that composition of the food? And so I think biofortification as an avenue is absolutely on the table. And I think to your point, by fortifying certain foods with certain common elements, it could help disease. Although this is probably me talking. There's also danger in just making assumptions. And in Africa, with the profound anemia, there have been campaigns where there's been iron supplementation. A lot of anemia is iron deficient, but not all. And there's good data that if someone's iron sufficient and they get extra iron, particularly in cases or in areas where there's malaria, their health outcomes are worse. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Yeah.
Well, you're going to get another chance to speak, I think, now, Joe, because you should take a stab at this, and we can see if anyone else has anything to add. The other question we have on Slido is to address the consequences of climate change around body reactions to food. So thinking about increasing rates of intolerances and allergies, how does that fit into this picture?
It's actually a really good question. So I would say there's two elements there. I would say in the context, certainly in the context of being undernourished, individuals are unfortunately more prone to infections and potential autoimmune reactions to certain antigens and whatnot. I think what we're seeing in this going back into the realm of food processing, as more food's being produced with additives and emulsifiers and other types of elements that are non-nutrients, but sometimes bioactive. What is the immune response to those elements? What is the change of those foods especially if we're thinking about children? What are the early life exposures of the gut to those types of food? How do they modify the infant's microbiome, and how does that affect mucosal immunity? I think all those questions are all interlinked, and that you have dietary exposures to myriad things that affect the kiddo's mucosal immunity. And then that potentially sets the child up for future autoimmune disorders of the gut and systemically. So I think all those are linked. And again, what we call food, I think in this context of this discussion, as we think about generating more and more quote unquote food, what are the elements of that food, and how is the body going to react to that, and what are the biological implications of said food? Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for your very interesting audience questions, and thank you to all of our panelists. This is obviously an issue that runs the gamut in terms of climate hazards to be concerned about. It runs the gamut in terms of the potential organ systems and diseases where you see impacts, and it goes from farm through production to the plate at home. So this, I think, will be a large area for future research and hopefully an area targeted for solutions to help improve health under our changed climate. But with that, I will get out of your way and maybe encourage you to get a cocktail with like a fruit garnish. That seems like the healthiest way to finish the day. So thank you all and have a good evening.
Well done, Aspen.